We should be recording and we are live. Welcome, folks, to the latest edition of the Coaches Connect call. I'm Coach Jeremy. We have a few discussions already lined up for today, so I'm not going to waste too much time. And Sharif was just introing our first discussion regarding cheat meals, how they can influence kind of our daily macro intake, overall energy intake, as well as potential influences on the next day and the rest of the week. Does that capture kind of the essence of what you were sharing with us, Sharif?
Yes, exactly. With me,
Cool.
my clients as well.
So not only from a coaching perspective, but also from applying it to yourself. So I think this is an interesting topic. I have some ideas, but coaches, I want to open it up to you first. Uh, let's make it a little bit more general to start. What are our thoughts regarding the concept of a cheat meal? Do you implement them for clients? Do you use them yourselves? Even the verbiage around them. I'm curious to know. What are your thoughts, coaches? Uh, Kim, you have your hand up.
Yeah, and this is just my thought, and please correct me because I'm new to coaching and I only have one client. Um, but I don't look at like cheat meals because if I have that in my mind, I feel like it's like all or nothing thinking. As long as I'm consistent with most of my meals during the week, and that to me is like Monday through Friday, maybe sometimes one meal Saturday on top of that. And then I just kind of enjoy myself. It could be a burger, but like a
Mm,
healthier choice. Or I just try to refrain from the extremeness because then I'm just gonna it's really hard to control because if you're living with somebody or if you have a family and you see them eating different, it's kind of like getting into that mindset of you're dieting and you want to like get out of that and have more of that food freedom, but with control of just in mind being consistent with the good, healthier meals, whatever your goal is. And then I think it becomes fluid. It's like an ebb and flow. You don't have to think about it so much. And that to me is more sustainable.
fair enough. And I mean, I think as a general concept, it is quite useful for us to, one, think about the verbiage around the idea of a cheat meal. So, as Kim points out, shifting away from the idea that you're doing something wrong, the word cheat meal may bring up additional tension for some folks. And it is certainly something that we as coaches get to consider when we are working with folks. Uh, Another word or another term often used for cheat meal is the term refeed. Practically, same application, doesn't carry the connotation as so much of a positive or a negative. Uh, so, something to consider there for Sharif. Uh, as a coach. In terms of personal application, I'm curious to know if anyone has additional thoughts there, uh, or are there any potential guidelines that you offer to clients or for your own use when having, we'll call it a quote unquote cheat meal or a refeed?
Uh, I
Raphael.
work I work mainly with people who are trying to lose weight. So these people are those who have been struggling for a long time, with obesity, with bad habits. Um, so I don't do this kind of things like cheat meals because what I'm trying to do is to have them enjoy their daily eating instead. So when they start eating their veggies, the right amount of food, they won't be craving other stuff. Like they can still have their sweets and all that, but there is not such a thing like a cheat meal because every day can be a cheat meal. Also, if you are under control of your eating and you don't have to be feeling bad about that, if you know that you are just getting the right amount for your body. So, and this might be something more sustainable because what I think is when you have this kind of cheat meals, that is going to trigger those cravings even more because you're thinking, okay, on the weekend or so in this day I will have the opportunity to eat this that I'm craving so much. So, but when you on a daily basis you give yourself the opportunity to have, I don't know, a little piece of something, and you know it's not going to ruin your progress, so you won't be just looking forward to that cheat day or cheat meals. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it aligns quite well with what Kimberly was saying as well. regarding kind of the psychology of how we look at food, if that is an important part of your coaching approach, depending on the population that you're working with, or just kind of the way that you want to operate as a coach. Like, if it sounds like for both of you, you'd rather not engage in the idea that uh, certain eating patterns are good or bad, and that you require the ability to cheat in order to remain within kind of the narrow confines. So certainly something to consider there, and we'll talk a little bit more about the psychology of uh, of cheat meals or refeeds in a second. But I want to throw it to Charlie.
Hey, um, yeah, so I use an app that has recipes and stuff on it, and their terminology was treat meals. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably somewhere between refeeds and cheat meals, but I like the idea just because, yeah, as the other coaches have referred to, it's you don't really want that mindset of having something to cheat on, but treat sounds a little bit more positive, I suppose. Um, Personally, if my partner and I fancy something, it depends really. Like if you want to eat out or something, then that obviously is something usually more decadent and more of a treat. But if there's just something that we fancy, we might try and come up with our own recipe and healthify that and keep that more reasonable and whole food based. And I have a friend that coaches as well. And so for people that are eating out, if someone is kind of that all has that all or nothing tendency and hasn't quite got to the point yet where they fully trust themselves not to just blow out. He has this framework where he talks about two of four. So if you go into a restaurant, for example, you might have you've got your starter, main, dessert, and say like an alcoholic drink or two alcoholic drinks. He'd just say pick two. Um, and that's like a natural framework there that will kind of limit things, but you still get something that you fancy. So
Fair enough.
yeah.
And I think that is really good feedback specifically for Sharif on personal application here. So, Sharif, I hope you're still there and able to hear this one. So, as Charlie points out, having a framework that can help to mitigate overall impact of a single meal or a single day of eating can be useful. So, this was something that I think Kim shared as well. Charlie shared this. So, tools that you can use for yourself are, if you know that you're going to engage in a higher calorie meal and you're going to go out and enjoy it, potentially consider preparing it yourself or finding a healthier version or a less energy dense version of that meal to see if that is helpful. And then I really like the framework that you shared there as well, Charlie, kind of like the four elements of a meal. So if you go beverage, starter, main course, and dessert, where do you see priority there in terms of this is an experience that I want to have versus these are lower priority for me? So kind of stack ranking those meals to help with the decision making framework. So uh, if you're like, hey, I have a real sweet tooth, I want to get the Shirley Temple and I want to get the brownie with ice cream. Those are more important to me. But for my appetizer, I'm going to keep it a little bit more low energy. So I'm going to go more salad based, and my for my main, I'm going to keep that a little bit more protein dense as well. Both things that align a little bit more with my overall vision of healthy eating and what I do regularly. But the other two elements, I'm going to cut loose a little bit because that feels worthwhile to me. So that may be those are two potential ways where you can have some guidelines there and engage in kind of cheat meal slash treat meal slash refeed, whatever terminology you want to work on there. Sharif, how does that land with you?
I think there are many ways to look at it. One is like, as mentioned, that you can have like very small piece of something every day, so you
Mm-hmm.
don't have this crave by the end of the week and on the weekend for you to have a big cheat meal that ruins the week. And it there are many strategies that can solve relationship with food. One of them is the small treat per day, but that doesn't work for me because usually if I have like a small cheat, it will turn into a big one, and
Mm-hmm.
it might push me towards more wrong food, if you want to call it like that. So I would, for me, like one of the strategies that I would think that can help me is that having healthy cheat meals. like things
Mhm.
that look like full of sugar, but actually they're sugar free. A pizza that is full of protein, things like that. That's the thing that I think can work more for someone like me, because I really crave on weekends. Like I want to eat a burger, I want to eat a big pizza. Sorry about that. So
All good. Can still hear you fine.
it's something always that I have to fix. I need to fix the relationship with food, because on the weekend I feel like I'm a different person. I'm very unhealthy on that day.
Mhm.
And if you see me on the other days of the week, I'm a very healthy. I measure food. Everything is looks perfect. But then when it comes like the weekend, it's one day, it's a disaster. Like bakery in breakfast and pizza in lunch. And sometimes that pizza can even disrupt my sleep. So the next day is awful, despite that I had a rest day on the
Mhm.
weekend.
So, I mean, yeah, I think the term that you hit on there that is particularly powerful, both for you as an individual, but also for coaches in general, is regarding kind of your psychology regarding food and how you potentially implement it throughout the week is having more of a negative consequence from at least what you're sharing here. Obviously, we don't have full insight into kind of like what everything looks like. And as coaches, we want to avoid jumping to conclusions without having some supporting data or gathering data initially. But psychology of food is something that PN is very invested in terms of our coaching strategies. One of the areas of coaching that you may want to look into here is an intuitive eating approach. Part of their approach is we adapt in PN coaching, but there are other elements that don't get spoken about as often. One specifically being trying to remove all restrictions around food for at least a period of time to see how do you respond when the rules are kind of like taken away and you are allowed to listen to your body and eat as much as you desire. What happens in that situation? I think sometimes providing an opportunity for clients to engage in some periods where restriction is completely removed, just to see like how do things work when we take the fear and guilt and shame away from eating. Does it result in the worst case scenario that you have imagined in your mind, or do things actually settle into a more reasonable place? For some folks, we see that they actually settle, and it's like it was the pressure that they had put on themselves that were driving many of those food-based choices, or some of the choices that they felt uh, quite negative about. For other people, and this is getting more into the position of where does an allied healthcare professional come in, such as a psychologist, psychiatrist, registered dietitian. There are some food behaviors where uh, without a proper framework to work through, or without a decision making guide to help some people, they can end up in a place where it's like they're making really harmful decisions. And that is where more advanced help is typically needed. So things like medication or counseling. Not to say that this is something that you need to engage in, but we should be aware as coaches when this language is presented, being able to assess from our personal scope of practice what is the level of impact for this person, and then what appropriate strategies can I apply as a coach versus when should I start to notice some red flags and then have potentially different conversations regarding, hey, is this one cheat meal? Is this something where we're looking at more binging behavior? What does this tail kind of look like? And then triage accordingly. So it's a very interesting conversation that you bring up. As mentioned, I don't think there's one particular solution, but some of the guidelines and frameworks that have been shared by other coaches here may be something that you want to explore for yourself, Sharif, as well as potentially share with clients. And one of those takeaways that I think is maybe the strongest is in regards to just starting with changing how you view that meal and the verbiage around it. So, do we still continue to refer to it as a cheat meal? Does this become something more of a treat meal where I intentionally remove some of the framework that I would use all at my other meals and opportunities? Or is this something where it's like I completely remove that verbiage, don't use those meals at a specific time? There are many ways to move forward. Before we move on from that conversation, there's one thing I will say that there, this language and strategy, whether you refer to as cheat meal or a strategic refeed, tends to be quite common in physique athletes and in their preparation. So people who have a quite large energy deficit, high training volume, lower energy intake, uh, it can be quite valuable for them from a psychology standpoint as well as a physiology standpoint to have a specific day or a specific meal where they increase their calories uh, to ensure that they are able to mentally endure longer periods of restriction. Is this the healthiest thing for long-term health? I would say strong question mark, dot, dot, dot. Uh, but that is something that you will see a lot more in that space if you are engaging with training physique athletes or you're a physique athlete yourself. You're probably quite familiar with those terms. So again, not to say that they're inappropriate, but should approach them with a degree of understanding the psychology of food and how we form that food relationship as coaches to decide, is that something we want to talk about at all? Sharif, I'm going to bring it back to you. Does that give you a little bit of insight in terms of how you can potentially move forward with yourself and with clients?
It's very hard to tell because it varies from one person to another. Like for me, it can work the way I mentioned, but for someone else, it doesn't work this way. For someone else, it's more like I want to eat pizza. I want pizza full of cheese. Like I want like a cheesecake. Like for some people, this might not work. But for me personally, I have been thinking while you were talking about the different strategies that can work for someone like me. I think the biggest part is the quantities. That's the key of it. Because once you know that's forbidden for another week, you eat a lot, and this ruins everything. Like yesterday, like for example, yesterday was my cheat meal, so I have this big pizza that ruins the whole sleep. Like I wake up dehydrated from the pizza, so it's not healthy. I don't like it. I want to change it. So a key thing to consider, I think, is trying to play around with the options is one thing, and also play with the quantities is another option. And you mentioned something very, very interesting is that maybe I'm too strict on the week is a reason why I'm too off balance in the weekend. This rings a bell a little bit. So maybe I'm acting like this on the weekend because of the strict attitude during the weekdays. Maybe it's something to consider that I need to loosen up a little bit during the week and still be okay on the weekend by not having like a big cheat meal. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that aligns quite closely with some of the coaching feedback that you received here in terms of uh, is the cheat meal, is it providing more positive to your life or does the negative kind of outweigh that strategy? And if so, is it an opportunity for you to potentially look at different eating strategies throughout the week to try and take some of that pressure off and then minimize any of the potential damage or negative consequences you feel around the current strategy? So certainly worthwhile. Cool. I feel like we're a good place to move on from there. Just to address your question in the chat box, Magdalena, uh, SSR questions are completely valid and appropriate here. Feel free to ask them either by popping into the chat box or putting your hand up and we'll come to you. But first, I believe, Jessica, you had your hand up initially and there was a discussion that you wanted to start as well.
Yeah, hi. So I have a question regarding coaching in terms of how to schedule coaching calls. I used to like I did level 1, and then my calls used to be that in a specific call with my client, I will explain the practice that we're gonna go ahead with. Like first take the check-in of the previous practice and then explain the next one that we're gonna go ahead with. But then I recently completed level 2, and now because I realized that there are so many questions you have to ask, so much data to gather, so many things to do. So I felt like the 1 hour was very less for me to also take the check-in plus introduce the practice. So I just wanted to know that how do usually coaches go about? Is it like a separate thing, or like do also coaches, like in terms of practice, do you just send out the video first and then expect them to give you, just take the questions from them, like whatever their doubts are, or do you explain it on the call? So this was my confusion, like how does a coach go about the check-in plus practice introduction?
Fair. Okay, so less so scheduling the individual appointments in terms of putting them in your calendar, but more so scheduling each section of a check-in session so that you have a repetitive framework. Does that sound right? Cool.
Yeah.
Uh, Coaches, I want to open this one up to you, the group first. How do you schedule your check-ins so that you can share the appropriate information required? It sounds like currently you're scheduling for an hour. Uh, Coaches, yeah, also, how long is your check-in session? How do you schedule it uh, in terms of each individual section, and how much time do you normally devote to it? So, uh, Kim, what do you got?
Um, so I think from the business Kickstarter, Jeremy, I kind of followed your approach
Mhm.
where the intake is like a longer session, like maybe 60 to 90 minutes. And then the follow-ups from that intake, I asked them what frequency would they like to meet, would they want to do a weekly, I guess, like how high volume or high touch, I guess is the right word, they want to be. And those would be like 30-minute weekly, or ask them 45 minutes, whatever they prefer, or if they want to do like a bi-weekly. I kind of just leave it in their court and just ask the client. And
Cool.
then as far as scheduling, I do like Google Meet or
Mhm.
Zoom, and that's pretty much it.
Uh, in the follow-up check-ins,
Mhm.
do you have a kind of a framework or a loose framework that you follow in terms of how much time you want to devote to each category, such as uh, time for greeting, time for review, time for discussion, and then plan, and then confirm? Like, if we were to break it down into kind of that framework, do you have a rough idea of how much time you spend on each section?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember here I have the checklist. The first section, whatever that is, the agenda is pretty
Mhm.
quick. Like, oh, today we're gonna just kind of review the week and then pick another action, or stick with the same action and bring it down a little bit. But the observe and monitor, I think, is the time I spend the most because I'm asking a lot of questions on how the week went, what worked, what didn't work, what challenges came up, and we just have like a deeper discussion. And
Mhm.
then it kind of flows from there. Then we kind of evaluate, and then we see if we need to adjust the next habit or like shrink it down a little bit or pick a new one.
Yeah.
And then somehow like ask them, do they feel like it's tied to the main goal? And if they agree, then I mean, it's just like a lot of mirroring. Like I ask them questions, or like, yeah, I agree, just so they can kind of repeat it back to me.
Mhm.
I hope, I don't
Excellent.
know. Yeah.
And then how long does that roughly take you on a time perspective for that session?
So honestly, I've been going over just 10 minutes. So it's been like 40 minutes, but it just depends
Gotcha.
on the level of conversation that happens. But the
Mhm.
beginning part is the most that takes out of the time, I'd say, because you're reconnecting after the week or 2 weeks. I think that takes the longest.
Yeah. Uh, cool. I think that is. I'm glad to see one that you're trying to kind of note each section, devote appropriate amounts of time to those sections. Also, that you found out that the connection part tends to be the longest section, and also I would say is uh, not coincidentally is probably the most valuable from a coaching perspective when you're developing a coaching relationship and rapport. Coach John Mills, who used to be with PN, would always say in a 30-minute session, if I spend 29 minutes just talking to them as a person and finding out more about their life, then that was 29 minutes well spent, and I'll spend 1 minute on coaching action, and that is a good session. Uh, so, Jessica, if you're finding right now that you're finding it hard to fit everything in, it could be that you are diving into their life and learning more about them, which is good. This is how we strengthen coaching relationships typically. Uh, Anyone else have any insight into how they run their coaching sessions, time devoted to specific sections, and how you ensure that your client has the requisite information they need in that moment to take action?
So I work online with my clients. I have bi-weekly check-ins.
Mhm.
I reserve 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes, just that depends. There are some clients that they like talking a lot, so sometimes it might be a little bit longer than that. Um, Previous to the check-in, I have them fill out a form where I ask them questions about how was everything, what were their challenges or wins for the week or those 2 weeks, and questions about how they feel was that their level of commitment with the goals that we set in the last check-in. I have them upload pictures of their progress, and also take measurements, take their weight, and we go over all those things in the check-in. So that's what I do.
So you have, it sounds like you gather a lot of that information prior to the check-in, so you can review that independently and then use that to filter into your conversations with your client, as opposed to collecting that data in the conversation.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I have them fill out that information so I don't have to be asking those questions again through the meeting, and that would save us some time. So I review those answers before the meeting, and I actually just take and summarize everything and put them together along with the pictures in a document.
Mhm.
And I use that document for the check-in, where I also take notes of everything that is being said or agreed. Um, that's what I do.
Fantastic. So if you are time crunched, if you are coaching and currently running into some time pressure in your meetings, what Rafael does there can be incredibly useful to save some time and also help with future documentation. So that's really useful there. Anyone else? Sharif.
Actually, the check-in thing is very interesting because I've been coaching for a while now. I've seen very successful coaches that don't do any check-in calls, and some very successful coaches who does my clients. Some clients prefer like a weekly or bi-weekly maximum for calls, and other clients don't want any calls. So
Mhm.
it's one of the things that is very confusing sometimes if you want to have like a fixed service or a fixed package. So the conclusion I came up with after years of having this confusion with different kinds of people is that you should have like two packages or three packages. One is premium with very high touch point, like I mean, a very high frequency of calls. Maybe every 2 weeks you have a call, and one should be like a monthly call, 30 minutes, and one could be without any calls, like just people getting their training. They check in through text messages or maybe some kind of a coaching software where they put their scores and they give you like a fill like a form. um, for me that worked best because some people want very high um, touch points and
Mhm.
calls and follow up, and other people just need the program. So it's something that I haven't found one size fits all kind of solution, and I think this should be the case for many coaches.
Fair. Yeah, I mean, you get to, so the good news about being your own coach and operating your own business is you get to decide, hey, do I want to be a programs based coach where I have a program that I can deliver to a larger audience with a few clicks? Or do I want to be a more support based coach where I sit down and have more conversations with clients to offer them kind of more insight or personalize uh, the experience by sharing more of my time? There's obviously pros and cons with both. Specifically, in terms of your overall reach, it is really hard to have 100 client roster and meet with people every week. Most coaches are going to find that they're really sacrificing quality of life in order to do that. And then, of course, you charge differently based on the approach that you share. So there's some conversation in the chat box for newer coaches. If you want to check that out, I think it's quite useful to kind of get an insight into where some people can start. Uh, Jessica, to answer kind of your question based on my own experience here, in terms of running check-ins, I typically do weekly check-ins, as Kim mentioned, and I mentioned the Coaching Business Kickstarter course, the first session is always going to be the most information dense. It's where I'm going to do a lot of the talking with the client. This is after the discovery call. So now we're actually working together. I've reviewed their intake questionnaire. There's a lot of information for me to share. That session I normally schedule for 60 minutes and often will go over. I'm getting better at keeping it within the 60-minute mark, but it has taken a lot of time to refine it. Right now, I hit 57 minutes the other day and I was very proud of myself. But it is hard. It is a lot of talking up front. This is true of most of your initial contact with your client. I would say the kind of that kickoff call, 60 minutes, the first few check-in calls are also going to be longer, specifically because we are also not only educating our clients on the actions they're taking, but we have to get them up to speed on how our systems work. So if you're using something like ProCoach, you may need to educate them on, hey, this is where you share your measurements. This is how you log in. This is how you message me. If you have your own system, you'll likely be doing some amount of tech support within those first 2 to 3 sessions as well. So it makes sense that the first 2 to 3 sessions, give yourself a little bit more buffer time than you think you need in order to share that information. As you get greater rapport with your clients, as Raphael said, books a 30-minute session may not always use a 30-minute session. And that's where I am with especially clients beyond the kind of 6-month mark. A lot of our conversation, and Kim referred to this as well, is now getting into more the relationship side of things. So just greeting, connection, how are things going in your world? How are you doing today? Then going into review, how did the past period of time go? 7, 14, 30 days, whatever it is in between our last touch point. Any trends that I've identified, any trends that they've identified, then lead into actions for this week. Do we change our particular course of action for this week? Do we continue? Do we dial it up? Do we dial it down? Do we take a new different course? If you suspect that you're going to continue with that action, you'll likely find that there's not a lot of additional time needed. There's no more information I need to add. We just need to confirm what we're working on. You'll probably have a little bit of a shorter session and get some time back there. If you anticipate that we're going to be moving on to a new action step, then I would encourage you to factor that in at the beginning of your session. So it might mean prompting that session in that client by saying, hey, this week I've noticed this trend. I want to get into our conversation a little bit earlier today, so we're going to take a little bit of time away from kind of maybe the meet and greet section, a little bit less time on review, because I'm going to be sharing new information with you. So I want there to be a period where you can ask questions. Another thing I would say is, for at least the way that I operate, most of the practices that I'm working on will likely work on for at least 1 to 2 check-in periods. So that means at least 7 to 14 days, which also bakes in the idea that in the first 7 days, I expect that my client will have more questions, that they will maybe not fully grasp the concept, which is okay because we don't need them to grasp a brand new thing in 7 days. And then it gives us more time to answer questions in that second check-in. So an example would be week 1, we're working on eating slowly and mindfully. They don't fully understand the value of it, but they seem interested. They know that they eat too quickly. There's buy-in there. They've agreed to give it a try. I expect through that first week, there'll be some variable level of success. I do not expect that they're going to come back and say, all of my meals went from 2 to 5 minutes to 20 minutes. I had perfect digestion. Everything was better. Coach, what's next? It's mostly going to be a mixed bag. Session 2, I'm going to then kind of ask about their experience, clarify some things that we didn't have enough time to talk about in the first session, seeing as I focused on just the highlights of what they need to know. That second session clarifies things. I expect that there will likely be more practice in that second week and outcomes will improve, but I don't have to devote a whole bunch more time. Each successive week, week 3, week 4, week 5, will likely continue to refine. I won't be giving as much information. Session length could be shorter, but I can also just use that time to develop our relationship and keep talking about their interests, figure out more about how their weekend went, how did they integrate the stuff that we talked about last week, and I can use that time for more relationship building, which I think is likely more valuable than just delivering bullet point information. How does that land with you?
Yeah, I think a lot of helpful information. I liked the idea of maybe creating a form before the check-in so that I'm prepared, and I know what exactly we can cover and how to go ahead. I also liked the idea of different packages, or maybe just identifying that this is the kind of coaching that I want to give, which is more personalized or maybe more less touch points. Like just
Mhm.
identifying that can help, and how you also probably talked about like how a session can be smaller or can be bigger really gives me more perspective, because I used to think that, if I've said that it's 1 hour, then it's supposed to be 1 hour. Like,
No one is ever mad about
but
getting more time back and less
yeah.
screen time, especially as
Yeah,
long as they
so
have clarity in what they need to do.
exactly. Yeah, I get that. Just one more question as we were just talking. I
Please.
like how can I as a coach, or like, can we realize that the client is ready for the next practice?
Gotcha. So just before I share an answer there, I'm
Yeah.
popping this into the chat box to prompt our next discussion that we'll finish with for today. But how do we know a client is ready for their next practice or to move on from their current practice? Uh, Coaches, I'm going to open it up to you here and then I'll share my thoughts.
I can say from what I'm experiencing.
Please.
I think if they are able to do it like 80% of the time, like each week, and if they feel like good about it, like it doesn't feel like a challenge, that's a good sign. Then yeah. And then I don't know, Jeremy, that was actually a question I was gonna have. Like after the 2 weeks, do you kind of remove that action from what they see and then just kind of follow up like, oh, remember a couple weeks back we were focusing on this, like, are you still doing it? Okay.
Yeah, so to share my personal experience here, Kim, I think the guidelines and parameters that you shared are quite useful. So it's like, is this thing now happening more often than not? You could assign a percentage to it. 80% tends to be quite high fidelity. I would say they're doing the thing more often. That is a good number. That is a green flag that, hey, we can maybe move on from this thing. Um, for for myself, one of the things I look for is, does tracking this information still yield new insight for the client? So when we're starting to work on a specific practice, gathering information is really useful for them because it helps them to reflect on the practice they're working on, and it helps me as a coach to see any trends that appear. If the trend is changing over time in a positive direction or a negative direction sometimes, but the trend is changing over time and tracking it is no longer having the influence that it previously was, then that for me as a coach is a sign to say, hey, we can maybe move in a different direction. If it's moving positively, it's like, cool, let's move on to something that might be related but slightly more challenging. So think eat enough protein to eat higher quality protein. So this person they started really low numbers, they've gotten their protein up to a level that's satisfactory for them, they feel good about that. Tracking it doesn't seem to change it anymore. They're just kind of doing it because we've agreed to do it. At that point, I'm not interested in them tracking it anymore. We can say, hey, you're doing well with this. Do you see any value in continuing in a similar line? Do you think you'd benefit from increasing protein quality or anything like that? If they're like, yeah, great, I'm excited about that, that's the next thing we're going to move on to, which is kind of a continuation of the past. If, for example, we're working on something like improving sleep quality and it's set your bedtime or set an evening ritual and they're tracking it, but it's just consistently bad. Tracking it is not having a positive influence. The environment or potentially circumstance, for whatever reason, is not allowing you to make changes in that realm right now. We'll have that conversation as well and say, hey, this doesn't seem like something that is responding to additional attention right now. Can we work in a different area that you think would be valuable? Cool. Let's stop tracking it there and move to something else. So those are two examples of what I'm looking for in order to make that decision or to help them make the decision to continue or to move on. So hopefully that's helpful. Cool. We have about 15 minutes left. I shared a link in the chat box. So there was 3 discussions we had queued up for today, but instead we're hard pivoting to number 3, which I think is probably the most challenging of these three discussions. So what I'm going to ask you to do, coaches, is take a minute, scroll up in the chat, click on that link from Coach Tara Donovan in the discussion that she started, and take a minute to both read her post and then read through some of the comments as well. If you would like, or actually what I'm going to ask is, while you're reading, just turn off your video. And then once you are finished reading, in about a minute's time, I'll call you back and then we can have a discussion from there. I'm going to leave my video on. And also, please tell me if the link didn't work, because sometimes links don't work. Just as you're reading also, the question that I'm going to ask folks is kind of what stands out to you, whether you have experience with client situations like this, whether it has personal resonance for you, or if there was anything that you found particularly useful in the responses there. And there are some fantastic responses there. So take about another 30 seconds. Cool. When you're all done, come on back. So for folks who are able to read that one, very important coaching message. Obviously, for people watching the recording here, let me give you some insight. So this is a conversation started by Coach Tara Donovan, and Coach Tara was essentially sharing that she's been going through a whole bunch of new client discovery calls, talking with folks, and a common trend specifically amongst her female clients is a pervasive dissatisfaction with their appearance and with their bodies. Uh, and this is something that Coach Tara is having a hard time processing as an individual, and was looking to our community for a little bit of insight. And if you have the opportunity, I would strongly suggest searching in the community for Coach Tara's post, because I think if you work as a coach, if you work with primarily female populations, but it is not uncommon with male populations as well, or gender diverse populations, you will find that folks will often experience one of the drivers towards coaching is changing their body, and their current relationship with their bodies is suffering. And that may be something that brings them to your doorstep. So the emotional work of having this conversation is something that you may engage in as well. Again, depending on the type of coaching you do and the type of clientele that end up working with you. So I've personally had very similar conversations. I've experienced clients sharing tears with me, which again, as a coach, feels very heavy. The other side of that being that hopefully it means that I've created a space where they feel comfortable sharing emotion with me. So positive and negative there. But it is hard to kind of leave some of those sessions and then click out of the Zoom call and then where do I take this? So I'm glad to see that Coach Tara felt comfortable bringing it to the PN community. That being said, coaches, any feedback that you'd share with Coach Tara, or any feedback from your own personal experience? Charlie, I noticed that you were one of the first people back. What did you take away from reading that thread?
Honestly, it's not an area that I'm that confident in. It's definitely something I've struggled with. I don't have any clients currently, but when I was guinea pigging with one person, um, and full disclosure, actually, it got to a point where it felt like it was probably beyond my skill set to help manage, and we sort of agreed to step back because it didn't feel like I was helping, or what they were doing was helping. It felt like it um, had overwhelmed them. So yeah, put me on the spot a bit there, Jeremy. Sorry.
No worries. And I mean, I think the experience that you had there is similar to the experience that I had in some of these coaching scenarios, especially early on. Uh, a lot of the times we step into the role of coach because health and wellness or fitness had a positive influence in our life. And we can be working with people where their overall experience with health and wellness, starting from a very young age, which is something that is talked about in this thread, has been overwhelmingly negative. It has brought them nothing but shame and discomfort, uh, largely experienced first in adolescence. And if you read uh, I believe it's Janet Bosiovsky's comment here. I think it's incredibly valuable, and I would encourage everyone to check out specifically that comment, but there are a few other really good ones as well. Uh, our experience being overly positive, we would assume that it's like, oh, yes, this is the experience that other people might have as well, but it's often not. And just understanding that, hey, exercise and eating well makes me feel good. I assume it makes everyone else feel well or good is something that we need to kind of check that impulse, especially as we're working with folks who maybe have not had that same experience. Uh, as noted in this thread, it seems to be more pervasive in female or female identifying populations. I think we can probably extend that idea to everyone that we work with until proven otherwise is a good way to operate. Uh, as a young coach, I think something that I would have wanted to hear initially in this discussion was that while it is not my job to fix these people's kind of relationship with their bodies, I can have a positive influence by allowing them to have space to have that discussion. So just validating that, hey, I get where you're coming from. Even though I don't have the tools to help you deal with this, I'm glad that I'm a space for you to voice that concern because that is likely something that they don't talk about very often. It's not something that comes up over cocktails in a very genuine way, as opposed to it may make like a slight comment and a laugh and then move on. Uh, but if we're doing our job as coaches, we're creating spaces where people feel able to share some of their vulnerability. So if you're getting that feedback, you're likely doing some things right. In terms of Coach Tara's conversation about how do I handle these things, how do I leave these sessions, I think Coach Hannah Kulaga gives a useful kind of analogy there in terms of uh, the energy that people bring to a session. We do not need to walk away with it. It is not our problem to solve, but we can be part of their solution. So understanding that this is largely going to be a longer conversation. We can start to help them with the skills that we have. And I think it actually ties us back to our initial conversation about even being mindful of the verbiage we use, the idea around cheat meal versus treat meal versus refeed, versus do I even use that type of strategy with this person or with anyone that I coach? You get to decide those things. So there's a lot happening in this discussion. Before I move on, anyone else have any feedback or similar encounters in their coaching experience?
I think I would like to empathize with the client and probably um, congratulate them for taking the step to even like talk about it and go ahead and tell someone what their problem is. And yeah, and the same thing that we don't have to be affected by their problems. It is a good thing that I'm able to help them, but I don't have to be affected by their problems.
Yep, incredibly, I think, valuable, especially as if you are someone you're working, moving into this space. If your assumption is that I'm going to tell people to eat more protein and veggies, and that is the level of conversation that I'm likely to have, you might find out quite quickly that there are some deeper conversations that underlie a lot of our coaching, and uh, it may feel uncomfortable initially to engage in them, but having supportive communities like this is hopefully somewhere where you feel like you can turn to have that conversation to help you process it. So just as Coach Tara is doing. Uh, Looking through just some of the comments here. Uh, One of the things, if you're using a pro coach, so this is a soft pedaling of pro coach here. One of the questions that we ask in the intake questionnaire, there's two actually, shame and guilt related to eating and anxiety related to eating. I believe those are two similar questions, but they give a good launching point for those discussions to preemptively get ahead of them, which many clients are not expecting. Uh, I don't know many softwares that get into kind of like guilt and shame related to eating and how people kind of perceive that for themselves. But it is almost always a conversation that I have with clients. Uh, if they put zero there, I let them know, hey, I'm really glad that you're coming in with minimal guilt and shame related to eating. And if I do my job right and we do our work correctly, then all of our strategies will keep those numbers low. But if at any point you feel like that number is creeping up, please let me know, because it means that something in the strategy that I've set forward is not working. So I give them kind of a valve to take off that pressure and let them know that I am mindful of those things and we want to use strategies that do not bring that up. Also, if the number tends to be higher, uh, then that is a deeper question and conversation for us to have, because it will certainly or almost certainly play into the strategies that I use with that client. What tends to be true uh, from like the correlation that I've seen is if the numbers are higher guilt and shame related there, uh, with my client, I'm less likely to one take measurement data right away. I don't do that for most clients regardless, but I'm much more mindful to ensure, hey, turn off the share your progress card until we have a further conversation to turn it on if they ever want to. Uh, and also measuring and tracking food is something that becomes a lower priority initially. So uh, hopefully this conversation kind of stimulates some ideas for you as a coach, how you proceed with some of those conversations. They are challenging conversations, and know that if you ever feel either stuck or incapable of holding those conversations with your clients, you can bring them to this space. It is a good conversation for us to all have. And again, it is not your job to solve those things for clients, and understanding when you need to ally with other professionals is quite useful. But you can be a safe harbor for some of those folks to have that conversation and start exploring those ideas, which they may have kind of kept bottled up for a very, very long time. Looking at the time, we're pretty much up on time. Any final thoughts from anyone before we sign off for today? Cool. Thank you, folks, for your willingness to engage, for bringing good conversations and helping each other process those conversations. I think our next call is on May 13th. Might be with me, might be with Coach Kate. We'll have to wait and see. All right, gang, take care.